This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging market stocks were down today, and that's after 6 straight days of gains. MSCI's index of emerging market stocks fell 0.5%, mostly on the back of a slide in Chinese blue chip stocks. Now, the index is set to end the year around 5% lower, far underperforming an over 25% jump in the S&P 500. Traders say increases in coronavirus cases has continued to fuel worries about the chances of a global economic recovery next year. South Africa's shares inched up. The JSE maintained a positive trend in its final trading week of the year, boosted by gold and platinum stocks. All major indices were up, with the industrial index climbing the highest, up over 8% on the day. Now, also coming up on today's show. Tanzania contracts a Turkish firm to construct the eagerly awaited standard gauge railway. The spread of COVID-19 fails to dampen Egypt's business spirit this festive season. And the production of iPhones in India put on hold after mass food poisoning at Apple's plant. Well, we start off today's show in Tanzania. The country has signed a contract with Turkish firm Yapı Merkezi to build a 368-kilometer section of a standard gauge railway. Now, the project is expected to cost $1.9 billion and will be funded by loans. It is all part of a 1,219-kilometer line, which Tanzania is building to help boost trade with its neighboring countries. The full line will connect Tanzania's Indian Ocean port and commercial capital of Dar es Salaam with Mwanza, which is a port city on the shores of Lake Victoria, which straddles the borders of Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya. Now, President Samia Suluhu Hassan said that Tanzania will find friendly loan facilities in order to get those loans. She added that the state won't get this money from levies or from domestic taxes. The East African nation is currently implementing mega infrastructure projects in order to support its industrialization plans, including a controversial 2,000 megawatt hydroelectric dam being built in a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And moving on now to South Africa, a high court has halted Shell's seismic survey along the Wild Coast. This is the second application made in the same court to stop the company's seismic survey. Now, this comes after a court dismissed the application by activists to stop the survey on the basis that irreparable harm to marine species had been proved. The applicants include the Amadiba, the Dweseswebe, Port St. John's, and the Quay Mouth communities, which of course are all small-scale fishing communities. In their application, the applicants argue that Shell does not have the necessary environmental authorization in terms of the National Environment Management Act to lawfully undertake seismic exploration activities in that area. Meanwhile, South Africa's health ministry has recalled rules that no longer required people without symptoms of COVID-19 to isolate or to test if they have been in contact with a positive case. Last week, the health ministry said that asymptomatic individuals who had been in contact with a case of COVID-19 no longer had to isolate, but should monitor for symptoms for 5 to 7 days and avoid attending large gatherings. While those who developed symptoms needed to get tested, and those with mild symptoms should isolate for 8 days and severe cases for 10 days. It had also revised protocols on quarantine, saying all quarantine facilities outside the home will be stopped, while contact tracing efforts would also be scrapped. The country has led the continent in terms of COVID-19 cases and deaths, as well as vaccinations, with a total of 3.42 million cases reported and 90,000 fatalities. Cases started declining this week, with some 7,000 new cases and about 25 deaths reported in the past 24 hours. And moving on to Sudan, where rescuers are working to retrieve the dead and injured from a gold mine that collapsed in the country's West Kordofan province over the weekend. Now, according to authorities there, as of Wednesday morning, 38 bodies had been recovered from that mine. At least 8 injured people have been taken to hospital. The mine collapsed on Sunday evening when, according to witnesses, about 40 people were believed to be inside it at a depth of more than 20 meters. The mine had been condemned for being unsafe and had been guarded by security forces for a while to ensure that no activity resumed. Now, according to officials, local miners came to work the mine after the forces left the area. Well, let's discuss this further with Jan Pospisil, and he is an associate professor at the University of Vienna. Great to have you with us on the show, Professor. Now, of course, what we are hearing is that this particular mine had been condemned for being unsafe. Actually, 4 miners were killed at the same mine in January. It had been guarded by security forces, as we mentioned, to ensure that no activity resumed in it. So what do we know so far about the cause of that collapse and, of course, the toll it has had in the country?
Yeah, indeed, as you say, the mine has been decommissioned for some time and has been assumed as being completely unsafe. But the problem is that the Sudanese gold industry, in a way, is completely running unofficially. So not completely, but most of it. So of course, there is the chance in a country otherwise depleted of economic opportunities for people just to still continue working in decommissioned mines to get some gold out and put it into the economic circuit.
You're quite right, because collapses, or rather mine collapses, are apparently a common thing in Sudan's gold mines. Give us some insight into why you think mining gold is seen as unsafe in the country. What truly is happening on ground?
I mean, it goes back historically to the separation, basically, of South Sudan from Sudan, which basically depleted Sudan of its oil resources. And basically then, when oil got lost as the main source of economic income, gold was the resource that take that place. And what we have to know is that the gold industry never was that clearly kind of guided and controlled by the state as it has been with oil. So most of the gold industries have been, mainly in Darfur, but also in Kordofan, have been basically not illegal, but under kind of the radar of kind of state influence. A lot of them controlled by militias, a lot of them just operating basically on a day-to-day basis by basically illegal, not controlled mining efforts. And that's the situation where we are, that lots of these mines collapse, they're unsafe, there's no safety standards whatsoever.
But these mines are quite important to the country's gold mining sector. In fact, data shows that about 2 million traditional miners work in semi-legal mines across Sudan. They're behind about 80% of the tons of gold that Sudan produces each year. Yet, of course, as you mentioned, they work in unsafe conditions. Why has this not been addressed, especially given their significance to the gold mining sector? What are your thoughts?
I mean, it is a well-known fact that most of the gold kind of trade is controlled by military forces that are basically close to the presidency, what is currently ruling the country. Basically, at the moment, the vice president, Hemeti, who is controlling the rapid support forces in Darfur, his brother is one of the biggest gold traders and also gold mining owners in the country. And gold trade is more or less controlled by parts of the military. So of course, they have no particular interest of stronger regulations or kind of even international oversight of the sector, because they make their money out of it. And this is basically the reason why illegal mining is continuing like it is.
Well, we do have to leave it there, but many thanks for those great insights, Mr. Pospisil. That is Jan Pospisil joining us from Vienna. He is an associate professor at the University of Vienna. Well, let's move on now to Tunisia, where the government says it expects its budget deficit to narrow next year, even as it continues to struggle to revive an economy battered by the coronavirus pandemic and also a lingering political crisis. Now, according to Finance Minister Siham Namsier, the economy is projected to grow 2.6%. That's compared with 2.8% this year. The budget deficit is expected to narrow to 6.7% from 8.3%. Now, experts say since President Kais Saied fired his prime minister and suspended parliament in July, the need for an agreement with the International Monetary Fund has grown even more urgent, and that's amid concerns about the ability to meet creditor obligations. Officials have said that they expect a deal with the Washington-based fund in the first quarter, and they've offered assurances that they'll keep foreign reserves at levels sufficient to meet their obligations. Now, Namsier said the government will again raise fuel prices in 2022, which is a move unlikely to further anger the powerful labor unions who have already rejected tax hikes and, of course, price increases in the country.
The size of the budget for 2022, remember this figure, is 57.261 million dinars. That's the size of the budget for 2022, an increase of 3.2% compared with the complementary financial law. The budget deficit, excluding donations, will be within 9.3 billion dinars. The deficit is expected to hit some 6.7% of GDP. What's the result of these balances? The result is a need of financing, as you know, and as in every year, and the need is estimated at 18.673 billion dinars, in addition to a treasury need of 1.31 million dinars.
And on that note, let's take a look at our corporate headlines today. Insurance firm Britam Holdings has sold over $100 million worth of shares in leading Kenyan lender Equity Group to the International Finance Corporation. Now, the deal now gives the investment arm of the World Bank a 6.7% share of the lender. Britam started buying equity shares in 2004 and holds them directly and through its insurance subsidiaries. It held an 11% stake in the bank when it listed on the Nairobi Securities Exchange in 2006. And staying in Kenya, running shoe company Enda has raised $1.1 million in a recent Series A funding. U.S. impact investor Talenton led that funding round, which also counted with participation from several Kenyan angel impact investors. Enda plans to use the funding to expand its product lines and distribution, gearing towards being a top high-performance shoe brand going forward. And thousands of flights around the world have been cancelled this week in a continuation of travel chaos that unfolded over the holidays. U.S. carriers Delta Airlines and Alaska Airlines are amongst those to cancel flights this week, with the two airlines collectively cancelling hundreds of flights on Tuesday and Wednesday. Now, both airlines have blamed weather and the spread of the Omicron variant for those disruptions. And finally, Spider-Man No Way Home is the first pandemic-era movie to cross $1 billion at the global box office. Sony's comic book epic has eclipsed that milestone in a near-record 12 days, tying with 2015's Star Wars The Force Awakens, and that's as the third fastest film to reach the billion-dollar benchmark. Only 2018's Avengers Infinity War and 2019's Avengers Endgame were quicker, smashing the coveted tally in 11 and 5 days, respectively. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let's head into a short break now, but still to come on the show. The spread of COVID-19 fails to dampen Egypt's business spirit this festive season. And Somalia's central bank launches a national payment system, easing transactions between local banks.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
So this is it, I'm just about to be shot.
A little tense here, bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Marawi. That's one of them, we're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
Who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas, so it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
This is the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the
Within
front
clear
line.
view of this front line position.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Now, of course, festivities this year are expected to be remarkably different from 2020, when there was muted activity due to the outbreak of COVID-19. While the Omicron variant continues to be a threat for the economy, there is optimism that the end-of-year celebrations will trigger a turnaround for most businesses. While CGTN's Yansur Hakim looks at one of the businesses that is cashing in from the current Christmas and New Year celebrations.
Festivities are back again this year, with decorations, lights and cheerful mood, springing back this season after a pandemic-induced absence in 2020. It's a relief for businessmen like Sameh Saad, who has invested in the leisure and hospitality industry and who had felt the brunt of the fallout during the last 12 months.
We were badly affected because it was a total lockdown from the whole world. So it's a crisis not in the hands of anyone, but we tried to manage and survive all the time.
But it's not just the travel agencies, big hotels, resorts and companies that were hit. Small businesses like this tiny but familiar flower shop in the upscale Cairo's neighborhood of Zamalek, in the same spot for over 30 years, saw its fortunes dwindle.
There was a lot of pressure on us like never before when the whole world went into a lockdown. We decided not to close down, but people were afraid to deal with anyone. They were afraid to come to the shop. We shifted to online sales, and even the online sales were not successful because people only bought their basic necessities at the time. Our sales dropped by 70 to 80%.
The owners had to readjust the way they have been operating, cutting down on working hours and expenses to cope with the difficult circumstances. But the end of this year is quite different. The tiny shop in a Cairo street and the large hotel chain are equally witnessing a recovery as economies around the world rebound.
There is huge demand during this festive season, and most of it is for the poinsettia flower and Christmas trees. The sales started to grow just before the Christmas celebrations and are continuing to increase. We are trying to provide the client's needs as much as possible so we can make up for the losses of the last period.
Winter is working very good now. So far, we are very good. We are in Egypt actually got big boom of tourism with a fast growing percentage than what we expected. We didn't expect to go so fast like this as demand. Unfortunately now the new Omicron is coming up, but we do not think that we will have the same problem and lockdown worldwide like the Omicron, like the COVID time last year and the year before.
Both agree that the New Year festivities have brought with it renewed hope and good signs for the year ahead, and hopes it will be the turnaround from the downturn. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's head to Somalia now. The country's first public oxygen plant was opened in September, a shot of hope for a country where life-saving treatment for the coronavirus has been largely unavailable to patients during the pandemic. Take a look.
The COVID-19 pandemic underlined the desperate shortages of medical oxygen in many countries, and especially for Somalia, a nation whose history of conflict has negatively affected the healthcare sector. Shortages of oxygen and other equipment mean Africans who have contracted COVID-19 are more likely to die than patients elsewhere, according to a study published in May by the medical journal The Lancet, which cited data from 64 hospitals in 10 countries. However, a new plant in Mogadishu was purchased for $240,700 from Turkey by the Hamoud Salam Foundation and has been established by the country's largest telecoms company, Hamoud.
Hormuz, which donated the new oxygen plant, will also maintain the new plant. So we have no fear. The donators are now citizens. We have oxygen cylinders in the wards to help mothers and children.
The foundation also paid to repair the COVID wing it had set up at the hospital where it was installing the oxygen plant. The wing and the hospital's outer wall was partially destroyed during an attack in July by Islamist militants Al-Shabaab, who were fighting to overthrow the government.
In today's global world, because of the lack of oxygen, there is a huge demand. The main heart of this project is the sleeves, oxygen sleeves, is a kind of stone which makes a chemical reaction and take oxygen from 21% to more than 90% purity.
The oxygen will be distributed among the public hospitals in the capital, Mogadishu, free of charge. However, medical oxygen production needs experts to operate and maintain the equipment. It also needs electricity and water, which are unreliable in most Somali public hospitals. Beryl Oro, CGTN.
Meanwhile, Somalia's central bank recently launched a national payment system that makes it easier for local banks to transact business amongst themselves. The platform is part of ongoing reforms to improve its economy. It is already bearing fruit as millions of dollars worth of transactions have gone through the system. CGTN's Mohamed Kahiye sat down with the governor of Somalia's central bank and now reports.
Launched 5 months ago, Somalia's national payment system has already removed several barriers in the growing banking sector. According to the governor of the central bank, the platform is a game changer.
It makes the transaction between the businesses very smooth, efficient, and it happens within minutes. So this is a new dawn for the financial sector of the country. Therefore, one of the major achievements. And we are getting very good feedbacks from individual customers and of the banks and businesses. They changed the whole dynamics of the financial sector. And we see the benefits already. Millions worth of millions dollar worth of transactions have been already gone through the system for the last 5 months since we launched the system.
The governor confirmed that there are ongoing plans to issue new Somali currency as part of measures by the institution to strengthen the economy.
One of the major, the responsibilities and mandates of the central bank, as you know, is the issuing and distribution and safeguarding for the national currency. Therefore, this is a top priority for us, the central bank of Somalia, and we have already started the plans to issue the Somali currency after many years. This requires a lot of preparation, and we have done most of the preparatory work to reprint the Somali shilling.
The Somali Bankers Association acknowledges the operations of the national payment system have boosted the financial security.
The system enables the central bank to closely monitor the transactions and trace possible illegal transactions such as fraud, money laundering. I believe this new system will take the financial industry in the country to the next level when it comes to financial security, efficiency, as well as making every move traceable. It is a game changer.
The relative peace and stability experienced in the country in the past years is attracting foreign investment, mainly in Mogadishu. The international financial institutions from the neighboring countries, the Gulf states, as well as Turkey, are waiting for approval to join the booming market to have their share. Hamid Kahi, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Now, Nigeria's public debt load has become a big talking point in the country as it approaches the $100 billion mark, with debt service taking up well over 60% of available revenues. Many now fear that the country's debt load may become unsustainable. However, the federal government now says the debt is necessary to build the public infrastructure, which, of course, Nigeria desperately needs. Here's CGTN's Deji Badamosi with more.
Nigeria plans to spend close to $42 billion next year. But what's got people talking is the budget deficit, which is slightly more than a quarter of the entire budget. At about $15.2 billion, the budget deficit is 3.39% of the country's GDP. And to make up for the deficit, the government will have to borrow to fund the budget.
There's no way you can worship money and talk about policy and talk. People are dying. So they have to borrow money to invest. And then the thing was that we needed an expansionary policy because we went into stagflation. So at the time, the inflation was rising as well as unemployment and output collapsing. It's a different type of recession. So they had to fight it out by pouring money on it and then raising revenue for the household and all kinds of statutory forbearance on the banks and bringing down interest rate. All those measures kicked us out of recession within 1 quarter. So it's a very necessary thing to do.
As at September this year, Nigeria's total debt stood at approximately $93 billion, with additional borrowings expected to fund the 2022 budget. The figure will surely go up.
What is more worrying is that if you look at the analysis, we're borrowing to curb to spend on recurrent expenditure. And that for me is not a good thing. Today, we have excess of 90% debt to revenue ratio, and that is also very worrying. So yes, our debt position is indeed very worrying.
The government says Nigeria's debt challenge is actually a revenue one. While the country's debt to GDP ratio is currently at 35.7%, its debt service to revenue ratio is 70%. It's a clear evidence that the government will need to drive up revenues substantially for the country's debt to be sustainable.
We all have to work, not just federal government, but state governments, to increase our revenue to enhance our debt service obligations. And we also have to make sure that when we're choosing the projects, we're choosing carefully the ones that will enhance business environment so that more revenue yields comes into the treasuries of the country.
Nigeria's infrastructure needs are enormous, and with the help of borrowings, the country is gradually addressing its infrastructure gap. With the help of funding from China, for instance, the country is modernizing its railways, building roads, new aviation terminals, and many others. But many are still worried over the ballooning debt profile of the country. DG Badimosi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
And turning to Senegal now, the country has unveiled the first new railway to be built since it gained independence from France. The regional express links the industrial city of Diamniadio to the capital, Dakar.
The new $1.3 billion commuter railway looks to ease traffic heading to and in Senegal's capital, Dakar. Currently, the regional express service connects Dakar to the industrial city of Diamniadio.
Today, here in Diamniadio, the emerging Senegal has taken a new step in its upward trajectory. Our march towards our emergence continues because tomorrow, the regional express will arrive at Blaise Diagne Airport, and then step by step, we will go to Thiès, to Mbour, and even further.
The railway is part of President Macky Sall's Senegal Emergent Plan, which looks to speed up the country's development.
All Dakar residents are victims of traffic jams. You lose a lot of time, you lose energy, sometimes you lose markets, you lose even in the operation of the public and private sector. It is a huge difficulty, and without the railway, you cannot go far.
The railway is expected to carry around 115,000 passengers daily. The 45-minute ride from Diamniadio will cost $3 US. Astatal, CGTN.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's head into a short break now, but still to come on the show. Production of iPhones in India put on hold after mass food poisoning at an Apple plant. And stricter food safety rules set to come into effect in China. Change is on the horizon. Through the shifting of time, Africa's emerging tech landscape is creating new channels.
There's a hunger for local African content globally.
Shaped by innovation, carved out by a new generation of digital entrepreneurs, sculpted by a mobile revolution, and trickling down to the most remote corners of the continent. TechSpot is seeking out the new concepts in technology, disrupting Africa's traditional sectors.
Welcome to the world today on CGTN.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories, are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now let's recap other headlines this hour. The head of the World Health Organization has warned that the simultaneous circulation of the Omicron and Delta COVID variants is creating a tsunami of cases, which now threatens to overwhelm hospitals. Meanwhile, the United States and many European nations reported record COVID cases, although some experts have urged caution because of Christmas reporting delays. And Sudanese authorities say at least 38 people are dead after a closed gold mine collapsed on Tuesday in West Kordofan province. Now, several shafts had reportedly collapsed. At least 8 people have been taken to hospital. Authorities say the site was not functional, but locals began mining after guards left. Troops are now guarding the site to stop unregulated mining. And after 2 days of talks, the Libyan parliament has failed to reach an agreement over a new schedule for elections. Parliament decided to delay those negotiations till next week, and that's after summoning the Electoral Commission to share its concerns with the MPs. The High National Electoral Commission recommended delaying the December 24th presidential election by 1 month to January 24th. But of course, the country needs Parliament's approval first. And finally, in Somalia, sources say that negotiations are underway in an attempt to diffuse tensions between the country's president and the prime minister. The behind-the-scenes talks come on the back of reports that heavily armed factions were patrolling parts of the capital Mogadishu on Tuesday. Now, soldiers loyal to Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Robi took up positions near the presidential palace. That's a day after President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo announced the suspension of the Prime Minister over suspected corruption. And that's a recap of other headlines this hour. And now let's get you some international news. Apple has placed the Southern Indian factory of iPhone assembler Foxconn on probation. The decision comes after both companies found that some worker dormitories and dining rooms did not meet required standards. Now, Apple did not say how long the probation will last. Foxconn's factory in the state of Tamil Nadu employs about 17,000 people. Protests erupted in the factory last week after hundreds of women who work at the plant and live in one of the hostels had to be treated for food poisoning. More than 100 were also reportedly hospitalized. Now, production at the Taiwanese contract manufacturing giant's plant was halted on December 18th. And the General Administration of Customs of China announced stricter rules for food imports earlier this year. It also said they will come into effect in 2022. As Chao Chufeng now reports from Beijing, customs officials say that the new rules are aimed at ensuring better food safety.
The General Administration of Customs of China, or GACC, says the new rules are in line with China's updated food safety law. The 2 decrees come into effect on January the 1st. One of the focuses for Decree 248 is on registration requirements, whereas Decree 249 aims to get food import safety measures up to code.
These are requirements of the food safety law of the People's Republic of China. The 2 decrees will not only better protect food consumers, will also improve the food safety supervision system, clarify the stakeholders' responsibility.
After Decree 248 is implemented, one significant change is that all overseas food manufacturers, processors, and storage facilities will now need to be registered with GACC. Among them, 18 categories of food, such as meat, aquatic products, are subject to the registration recommended by the competent authority of the home country. And Decree 249 will provide new enforcement tool for GACC to inspect food imports and suspend or prohibit food imports into China when violations are identified. These rules did face some oppositions. Diplomats from 7 countries have asked to extend the grace period for another 18 months, saying businesses need time to adjust. But GACC says these rules and their transition period fully comply with the requirements of international trade organizations.
China notified the WTO of the 2 decrees in advance. We received comments from various parties and adopted all reasonable suggestions from related stakeholders. The transition period fully complies with the requirements of the WTO.
And in terms of rolling it out, one business association says it is not as hard as some have imagined.
As far as I know from the businesses, the documents needed for registration were the same documents provided at the customs clearance in the past. The rules only mean these documents must be provided in advance, so it's not difficult to prepare for registration.
China's food import market is booming. In 2020, China's food imports exceeded $100 billion. This year, it's expected to have increased by 20%. Reuters has reported that some diplomats and exporters see the new rules as trade barriers. But Professor Liu Baochen at the University of International Business and Economics says China is still open for business.
20 years ago, our tariff was more than 23%, and now it's a little more than 15%. It's a substantial reduction for the imports of all food, comparable to the average of the whole world. Only 1/4 of their average tariff rate.
Since these new rules were announced earlier in 2021, Chinese customs authorities have held online courses to help businesses meet these regulations on time. China also plans to lower import tax even further on some consumer goods, including certain food products next year. Experts say this is a clear message that China still welcomes food imports. Cao Chufeng, CGTN, Beijing.
Well, let's now go to Afghanistan, where 4.5 months after the Taliban takeover, the government is working to improve the dire economic situation with little international assistance. With many challenged on the ground, millions of Afghans are now struggling to make a living. Well, Zmarayali Abbasin explores the difficulties the new government has been facing after the US and NATO troops left.
The wreckage left behind by the US forces during the evacuation process are still evident in some part of the airport. In this corner of Kabul airport, known as Abbey Gate, where there was a suicide attack claimed by ISKP on 26th of August, which killed or injured more than 250 people. And after that, there were gunshots by the US and other foreign forces from the nearby towers, which also had heavy casualties. Taliban fighters took full control of Panjshir Valley, the last pocket of anti-Taliban resistance, in early September. On the 7th of September, the Taliban announced an interim government, and most posts went to long-time leaders in the Taliban power structure.
We will deliver a different and efficient government to the people. We know there are hundreds of thousands educated people, educated cadres. That is our asset. We need that asset in rebuilding our country.
Possibly, they may have many issues with regional countries and the world strategically, but there is no war with any neighboring country and no civil war currently.
A looming humanitarian catastrophe, economic crisis, drought, women's rights issues and unemployment are the main challenges that a nation racked by decades of war now faces. But some say security has improved.
Girls are able to graduate from 12th grade only in 7 provinces, but the fate of education in 27 more provinces is uncertain.
Since the arrival of the current system, we haven't seen any positive change. There have been very fewer positive changes.
Security is one of the examples. Currently, the security condition is very good. Previously, no one was feeling safe.
Now the question is, will the government formed by the Taliban, which is still lacking international recognition, be able to tackle all of these challenges? Zmarayali Abbasin, CGTN, Kabul.
Now, of course, the year 2021 has seen extreme weather events occurring more frequently around the world. It also saw countries rich and poor pulling together at the global COP conference to find a solution against climate change. Well, CGTN's Nawid Jabrakil takes a look at the efforts that have been made so far.
From record-breaking wildfires to the worst floods to hit Germany in 200 years, 2021 was another year where the devastating effects of climate change impacted millions of people around the world. Against that backdrop, almost all of the countries on the planet met here in Scotland to try and agree on a way to save Earth.
When the UK took on the COP presidency, less than 30% of the global economy was covered by a net zero target. That figure is now 80% and climbing.
The main goal in Glasgow was to limit global temperature rises this century to 1.5 degrees Celsius, but there were many stumbling blocks, not least the clear division between rich nations and poorer ones. Many developing countries wanted more financial help from those that have historically contributed more to climate change.
12 years ago, rich countries made the pledge of $100 billion every year by 2020 for developing countries to tackle climate change. It still hasn't been met.
As the deadline for the 2 weeks of talks quickly approached, a surprise last-minute deal between the world's two biggest emitters changed the course of COP26. The US and China said they've met almost 30 times this year to discuss the environment and vowed to work together on the issue.
The United States and China have no shortage of differences, but on climate, cooperation is the only way to get this job done. This is not a discretionary thing, frankly. This is science. It's math and physics that dictate the road that we have to travel.
There was some late drama. 24 hours after the deadline for the summit had officially passed, India and China pushed for the final deal to be changed to allow more time to wean off coal, which remains important for the economies of many developing countries. Exhausted, overwhelmed, emotional, the president of COP26 announcing a deal had finally been reached.
At the start of this summit, the world was asking, quite rightly, do the parties assembled here in Glasgow have the courage to rise to the scale of the challenge? Well, my friends, you have responded. We have responded.
Many climate activists welcomed the deal but said it didn't go far enough. Even with the pledges made here, scientists say the world is on course to warm by 2.4 degrees Celsius, and those most at risk still worried about the deadly effects. The deal reached here in Scotland left many nations unhappy, but with so many competing interests, any agreement could be good news for the planet. There was also a realization that much more ambition will be needed. But what COP26 offered was a platform for the world to try and work together on an issue that will affect us all. Nawid Jabrakil, CGTN, Edinburgh.
Now, the pandemic spawned supply chain disruptions and unprecedented demand, leading to historic inflationary pressures across the globe. Despite the headwinds in 2021, the global economy has regained its footing, but challenges still remain. While CGTN's Li Jingye looks back on a difficult year.
A shortage of goods and surges in inflation were evident in 2021. In the US, where coronavirus has hit hardest, consumers struggle to get their hands on products they once took for granted, like Christmas trees.
We're having shortages of everything, and just, of course, it had to hit Christmas trees. And, I guess it makes sense, given, just supply issues of delivering the trees and the fires and everything,
As vaccines emerged as a defense against the spread of the then dominant strain of coronavirus, countries gradually reopened, releasing pent-up consumer demand. But supplies of goods couldn't keep up, as global port congestion, a lack of shipping containers, truck driver shortage, and inventory management unable to adapt to shifting pandemic came into play. Even so, 2021 was the year the world economy regained its footing. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, has projected a growth of 5.6% this year. It's a reversal of the contraction of 3.5% in 2020. The shortage of supplies relative to demand has driven up prices of goods from raw materials to finished products. Global economic recovery has also been hampered by skyrocketing energy prices. As businesses sought to keep up with demand for goods, oil producers were unable to meet fuel requirements. This has been compounded by the onset of a colder winter in the northern hemisphere. In Europe, gas prices have jumped more than 800% and power costs by 500%. In the US, gas prices have nearly doubled over the past year. Across the Pacific in Japan, fuel prices have soared to a 7-year high. Higher prices for natural gas and heating oil have driven up living expenses and business costs.
It's not an exact figure, but I think the heating costs have risen by about 20%. Farms like us use plastic for the greenhouse, and that cost also rose considerably.
The combination of soaring demand and supply disruptions this year have generated inflation worldwide. The U.S. Consumer Price Index was at its highest level in nearly 4 decades in November. European consumer prices rose at their fastest pace since 1997. Turkey's inflation rate jumped to over 20% in November, exposing the risks of its aggressive rate cuts that triggered a historic depreciation of its currency, the lira. Inflationary pressure has been more modest in China, the world's second-largest economy, which saw its CPI rise to a 15-month high of 2.3%. China is expected to post its second year of positive growth since the pandemic began at 8%. Looking to 2022, many questions remain unanswered. How soon will supply catch up with accelerating demand? Is the surge in inflation temporary or lasting?
I'm ready to retire the word transitory. I can agree that that hasn't been an apt description of what we're dealing with. I think the pandemic has contributed in very important ways to the inflation problem that we're facing.
From a rebound of 5.6% in 2021, the OECD forecasts global economic growth in the coming year down at 4.5%. Whether that will happen remains to be seen. Li Jingyi, CGTN.
Well, on that note, let's now take a look at commodity markets today. Oil prices edging towards $80 per barrel. That's before retreating to trade flat on the day at around $78.9 a barrel. Now, traders say that global supply outages and declining U.S. inventories offset worries about that rising coronavirus cases might reduce demand. Investors are also waiting for an OPEC Plus meeting in January, at which the alliance will decide whether to go ahead with a planned production increase of 400,000 barrels per day in February. Meanwhile, gold declining today for a second day as investors weighed evidence that the Omicron virus variant doesn't pose a major threat to global economic growth. The metal fell as much as 0.7%, breaching the psychologically important $1,800 per ounce level. Thin trading during the holiday season may also be contributing to larger swings in gold prices. Well, let's take a short break now, still to come after this. A budding designer offers inspiration amid COVID-19 pandemic in South Africa.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis,
Syria,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's go to South Africa now, where a talented fashion designer is proving to be a real inspiration to young people feeling discouraged by COVID-19. 26-year-old Ernest Motsi has already showcased at major fashion events, including the Paris Fashion Week, a big deal for any designer. But Motsi only discovered his talent and love for fashion a few years ago, after his career as a basketball player failed to materialize. In the midst of the pandemic, Motsi earned the title of head designer for Excelsior Luso.
I thought I was going to spend my whole life playing basketball. Unfortunately, that didn't work out because it's not a career in South Africa. And then I didn't know what I was going to do. One day I took my old jacket, I took my mom's fur jacket, I took the fur out and I put it in on my jacket, and the thing just turned out really nice. I came from the Free State 2017 and I was shadowing for like the year. And then the year after that, I got a bursary to study at Lysof. I was really blessed. I was really fortunate to have gotten the opportunities that I got. Lysof, the fashion school, is not affordable. We couldn't afford it. And then a year after that, I got a little internship at a place called Upcycle. So basically, they were using like waste material to remake clothing. And then a year after that, I was at Kateria Atelier as the junior creative director. I think fashion is my ministry. I think it's just my way of living. It's just the way I get through to people, and it's just the way I communicate better with people, you know? I have a better personality through fashion. I just feel like instead of telling someone to be confident, I can use that and they can see themselves as confident, you know?
For me, this collection represents exactly a South African woman, a glamorous woman, and now he's here doing his own thing. For me, that is like really, really incredible.
Being a young black creative in South Africa, the world is looking now, and if you are good at what you do, the world will definitely recognize that.
A lot of me is my mom. Just having picked up the energy and being around her so long and seeing her practice independence and seeing her practice strength. When I think of a woman, I think of she's the perfect example. She's the strong lady. Also going back to our storyline, Excelsior, and her being born in Excelsior. Excelsior was one of the biggest diamonds found in Africa. It was cut into 21 pieces. It was spread around the world. Hence our collection has 21 series. We were really trying to paint this strong woman, this independent woman, this reliable woman. And she's been that for me for the longest run.
Well, before we leave you today, a quick look at Africa's currencies. Kenya shilling continuing to weaken against the dollar. At some point, it hit an all-time low of 112 shillings per dollar. Now, the currency has been put under pressure by strong dollar demand from importers amid a reluctance by those holding dollars to loosen their positions due to uncertainty over future depreciation. Meanwhile, South Africa's rand inching down against a recovering dollar, showing little real direction in holiday thin trading during the holiday in the last week of 2021. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.